Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehakol niyeh b'dvarai.
Amen.
Okay, good morning, Chavra Getvach. Jumping back into a brand new week, B'siyata D'Shmaya of Sefer Likutei Moharan, continuing with Torah and Zayin. Today's shir is sponsored by David Kropley, Lenishmas Chana Lior Bas Shlomo Moshe Daniel, also sponsored in the schus of Aaron ben Yocheved for Parnasa ben Akal, and Basia Balimã Bas Yehudis Rivka for Rafua Shlema physically and emotionally B'kar of Mamish. Also sponsored by Zev Kleinli Lenishmas, his parents of Bryndel Bas Simcha and Ya'akov and Yeshעיהו, and as a schus for shidduchim for Yehudis Adina Bas Elisheva Rochel, Dovid ben Fayga, Kayla, Yonatan, Shimon and Hadassah, Ronit, Netanel ben Meechal, Mahnaz, Noach, Avram ben Rochel, Zeb ben Revka Bryndel, and all the singles of Klal. Also dedicated as a schus for Rafua Shlema for Chaim Yehoshua ben Chaya Miriam, and all of Am Yisrael be'ezras Hashem. Let's carry on with Torah and Zayin. We began last week and made good headway through the Torah. Here we come to a very, very challenging, difficult part. We're going to do our best with it. B'siyata D'Shmaya. So much of what we end up saying comes down in the moment. So just try to open our hearts and open our minds and try to find the mahalech with what the Rebbe is saying here. But just by way of introduction, to jump back into it, we were learning about the way in which Torah, both Torah Shebiksav and Torah Shebal Peh, creates malachim. And those malachim are appointed over everything in creation, from the aspect of the meta malachim that are associated with Torah Shebiksav, as well as the specific malachim that, like Torah Shebal Peh, specifies the parameters of Torah Shebiksav. These micro malachim come all the way down the hierarchy, down to every single specific detail of creation, and they all receive from one another. They have yadayim. A person whose emunas chachamim is strong is preserving, maintaining the structural integrity of the hierarchy of all the malachim, and the world is alive to that person. The world is full of vitality, vibrancy, healing works, right? Because the healing properties of all the different creations are potent, but a person who is struggling with the emunas chachamim, so then there's a disconnect between the Torah Shebal Peh aspect of the malachim that are operating on the specific levels of creation, and the meta malachim, the bechina, the aspect of Torah Shebiksav, and the hands are removed, right? The chain is undone, and the world is not able to function with its complete vitality as it ought to function. And therefore that person is not going to have any refuah l'makaseh, like we learned. A person who doesn't have emunas chachamim, ein refuah l'makaseh. So how do we get back our emunas chachamim? So the Rebbe told us the way to get back emunas chachamim is through the aspect of neder. And we explained when a person gets into the consciousness of neder, I spoke about the Shal Shudis, this past Shabbos at Anshi Shlomo, when a person gets into the consciousness of neder, which means I'm of my own accord taking things on. I recognize that this is what I need in a mature sense to live life within Gedarim, and I'm using my own volition to choose this, right? Not that it's put upon me, but like we learned last week's parsha, the Nazir it's optional, right? A person opts into it. So then they experience Torah Shebal Peh in their own system, and that gives them a perspective on Torah Shebal Peh as it stands, right? And they're able to conceptualize and characterize Torah Shebal Peh as, like the Rebbe told us, eitzos mirachik, right? It comes from a very distant place, or, like the Rebbe learned more specifically, it comes from tzaddikim who are involved in the aspect of rachik, because they're constantly making drushes in the Torah, using sources that are far-flung and applying them to the place where they currently are learning. But it's eitzos, right? It's pieces of advice. It comes from a place of keser. It comes from a place of rachamim. That restores the yadayim. We learned about Ramazim of Ya'akov Avinu. Once you have the collectivity of Ya'akov Avinu, which is neder, Avram and Yitzchak, which is the yadayim, so that's going to produce emunah. That's the aspect of David HaMelech. That's the aspect of Shabbos. Shabbos was Oinig Shabbos, was the Achila of Shabbos, and that accomplishes what a fast accomplishes. What does a fast accomplish? It accomplishes that one's enemies are falling before him, right? Where a person, like the way that we interpreted it, has dignity that's maintained, and people are able to respect and recognize this is a person that ought not be, his toes ought not be tread upon, right? And this is a person that we try our best to not to challenge or get in this person's way. This person is a person who needs to be respected, right? And the way that we're able to preserve that Tselem Elikim, the Rebbe told us, is through Zayin, right? Fasting preserves the Tselem Elikim. On a fast day, the person's kabed, right, which is the place of dam, and the place of kas, and the place of lowliness is not being fed, and therefore the mind is active. And then, when the mind is active, the pasuk said, "V'chatoisi mipanav tzarav," right? As a result of the panim, as a result of the person's face reflecting its Tselem Elokim, then v'chatoisi mipanav tzarav, it's Rosh Tevis Tzom, right? The fast causes that his enemies shall fall before him and fall away. So the Rebbe said that all of this can be accomplished through the aspect of Einik Shabbos. When a person is eating on Shabbos in a way of dignity, in a way of Tselem Elokim, in a way of consciousness, in a way not feeding the taiva, but in a way of really just experiencing the joy of what Shabbos Kodesh is, and every minute on Shabbos, right, is saturated with that emunah, like we learned about post-history, ki'ilu kol malachta hasuya, the menucha, right, and really to bask in that joy. So then, Meechal shetani rugzin, amar dedina kulum arkin v'yisabrimina. That's the aspect of getting kas out of the way, and then all that's left is the bechina of Abba B'tanugim, and that's va'an panihir midihir ilah. The very next sentence tells us that the face is shining. The face is shining with its Tselem Elikim. The Mela Einik Shabbos, in the appropriate way, accomplishes what Zayin accomplishes for the purpose of getting rid of the enemies, and that's a result of having the aspect of neder with the Adayim and Emunah, which is the Bechina of Shabbos, and that's the aspect of Yud and K and Vav and K, the Dalet of Ragli Merkava, Avram, Yitzchak, Ya'akov, and then Dovid HaMelech. So before we jump in and continue, just wanted to share, it's actually what I shared on by Shal Shudis, but most of the Chaver weren't there. Someone was, but the rest of the Chaver were not there, so it'll just be quick Chazara. But I was Zoich on Friday to learning with my Chavrusa to an incredible hasaga. I was actually sitting in this very chair, and right here, just a big gilui came down into the world, and it was, I think, in and of itself, was remarkable enough. I think was a really very important thought, but the way that it dovetailed exactly with Torah and Zayin is astonishing. So I want to share the following thought. We were learning a source that made reference to the Gemara that says Ein ben chayrin ela misha sha'isik b'Torah. Right? There's no truly free person other than a person who is learning Torah, isik in Torah, learning Torah, keeping the mitzvahs, living a life of Torah mitzvahs. That's called a ben chayrin. Right? That's quite a famous teaching from Chazal. And we're trying to reflect on this. Well, what does it mean? Right, that a person who is engaged with Yiddishkeit is called a ben chayrin, right? Because it's a shocking statement. L'chayra, it's the opposite. You're the least free, right? A person who's engaged in Torah mitzvahs, you live life with incredible degree of restrictions and guidelines and parameters, and everywhere you look, there's something you bump into, right? And it's an enclosure. You're sort of trapped or stuck within a system, or at least it can be experienced that way. So it's not exactly such an intuitive sentence to say that there's the freest person is a person who is engaged in such an experience. All right, so obviously just on a simple level you'd explain, well, hagufa, that's the point, right? And that's what it means on a simple level. Yes, that's what Chazal mean to say. You would think that it's the least free. Here we're telling you, no, there's a freeing element of being involved in Torah mitzvahs, and there are different ways of interpreting that, but that's exactly what Chazal are saying. But we tried to think about this on a deeper level. And we were reflecting on the way in which HaKadosh Baruch Hu creates the world. And we realized that when we say that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is infinite, what we are really saying is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is infinitely free. He has a lashon over there. We were learning the Sefer Ginatz Eka, as I mentioned this a number of times now. Phenomenal, remarkable Sefer. And he writes over there, he says, Hashem is not acted upon. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Kadmain, right? He's Yachid, right? He's beyond numbers, beyond anything. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu acts upon creation using the 10 elements of the 10 spheres, right? And then the aspect of proliferation. Once you have 10, that's the whole Indian that he's going into there. Can't get into the details of that now. It's a little bit complicated and not beyond the scope. But what we're learning over there is 10 and 11. not 6, 7, but 10 and 11. 10 building blocks, and then 11, which is the concept of everything beginning again from 1, using 10 as the baseline model, right? So that's why numbers don't start again, right? There's no like number for 11. It's just Yud Aleph, right? It's the 10, and then 1, and then 2, and then 3, until you get to 20, right? And then it's Chaf, Aleph, right? And so on. And that's what he's explaining there, and he explains in the most remarkable way that the aspect of 10 is Yud and Hey, and the aspect of 11 is Vav and Hey. Okay, not getting to that now, but that's basically all of reality is wrapped up into Yud Hey, which is the 10 building blocks, and then Vav Hey, which is the aspect of, as is the Gematria, 11, and gets into that very deeply, not for now. But the point that he makes there is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is beyond. Right? Even the 10th element, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is beyond, and in a certain sense, that's what 11 hints to, is that there's the Aleph acting upon the Yud, right? There's Yud Aleph. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is acting upon, and there's nothing that acts upon HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that tells you something. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is ultimately infinitely free in ways, I mean, it was mind-blowing just to read the sentence. The way that he formulated it is that there's nothing as free as HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You cannot imagine anything as free. Nothing in the physical world is free, right? In any similar way. There's no dimyan, right? Because no matter how free an individual might feel, imagine the freest thing you can imagine is still stuck in the parameters that makes that thing what that thing is. Right? If it's a human being, imagine the freest human being in the world. Whatever qualities that person would require, right? Endless funds, right? Financially, whatever you can think of. A person's free of everything. Sachakol, he's a human, right? He's not free to fly. Right? I mean, he can fly in an airplane, but he can't flap his arms and fly away. Like there are fundamental limitations. Like you say, he also puts his pants on, or trousers, I should say. One in America, the pants is the trousers part. One leg at a time, right? Nobody's free fundamentally. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is mamish free, endlessly free, not bound by anything. Bichlal. And yet, HaKadosh Baruch Hu goes through the process of creating the world. And the context in Sefer Ginas Egos, in the piece where we were learning, speaks about the whole hishtalshalus, the Seder hishtalshalus of all the malachim. It's in the context of the malachim. Of tzvakos, he's speaking about Yudkei Vavkei tzvakos, Elikim tzvakos, Netzach and Hod. But the general concept of Hashem has tzivos of malachim that go down the hierarchy. And he speaks about 5 layers, not getting into that whole thing now, but it gets more and more and more and more specific. Very much like Rabbi Nachman is speaking about in the beginning of Torah and Zayin. So Hashem, the infinite, who's infinitely free, chooses to generate a system of specificity. So much so that the first meta level of Malachim is not where it starts. It's not where it ends. It gets more specific, more specific, more specific. The way the Rebbe puts it, Tarsh B'Ksav, and then Tarsh B'Peh, right? And it gets even until the daikonos of the dikdukim of every single parameter of halacha. There's nothing left that's fake. Everything. Any possible scenario you can think of, there's a Shal Suchim Sefer that's addressed it. If not, so then the Poskim today will deal with it, right? Down to the nitty-gritty details of details of details of details of details. Hashem, who's infinitely free, chooses to generate this realm, both on the creative side of it, moving from Atzilus to Bria to Yitzira, Yitzira to Asiya, right? On all the fractal micro levels of this whole system, and then on the level of the Torah Kedosha, which powers it all, going from Torah Shebiksav, that's the metastructure, down into Torah Shebapeh, Farvos. Why did HaKadosh Baruch Hu do this? So it's a concept that we mentioned, I believe. I can't imagine if we didn't mention it. I don't remember exactly in which context we mentioned it, but I'm sure we did. But the incredibly deep revelation of Rabbi Israel of Gerona in Sefer Bir Eser Sfiras, which is the principle, the klal of koach hagvul bebilti gvul, the capacity for limit within the infinite. The way that he expresses it there is that we know that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is shalem v'chol mini shlemas. If we say that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is infinite, lacks, as a result of his infinity, it's a bit of a mind trip, lacks as a result of his infinity the capacity to generate a finite realm because he's too infinite. So then he said his lashon is nimsa ater mechaser shlimusi yisbarach. So paradoxically, by making him only capable of relating to infinity and creating infinities and infinite things, so then paradoxically he has a lack because he's only capable of being infinite and he's not capable of generating from within his infinity a realm of finitude. So it's dafka when HaKadosh Baruch Hu is able to be so infinite that one of the features of his infinity is a finite realm and an experience of finitude on whatever level of reality, but it's infinitely real in as much as HaKadosh Baruch Hu created it. It's an extension of reality, right? So, because that's what this whole world is, Einad Movade, but here we are, and this is a chair, and this is a table, and they each have their very specific properties and laws of physics that relate to each and every one of them, and their own weight, and their own gravitational, pull toward the earth, etc., etc., etc. Their own color, that it's real. So according to Rav Azriel there, and it's a very important klal, very, very, very crucially important klal, it emerges that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is infinite, it's not such a chiddush, because infinite we expect to be infinite. That HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the infinite one, the Ein Sof, is able to choose to generate a realm of finitude, the finite world. This is the apex, the pinnacle, the zenith, the cherry on top of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's infinity. I mean, that me and you are sitting here right now, under the conditions that we're under, in Malchus of Asiya, that it cannot get more constricted, more defined, more limited. Everything is HD, hyper high definition. I mean, everything there's not it's not blurry. It cannot get more specific. Everything is mamish exactly the way that it ought to be. This is in the maracha of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Ein Sofiyut, the pinnacle of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's infinity. This is the side of Nis'ava Loyla HaKadosh Baruch Hu Liyaslay Dira B'Tachtonim. It's dafka here in the limited finite realm that HaKadosh Baruch Hu's infinity finds its most acute expression. Okay. So now that we're applying to HaKadosh Baruch Hu this very remarkable concept that the deepest extent of Hashem's infinity, which we're now translating as freedom, is the choice to limit himself, kiviyachol, at least in a certain way, unfathomable to us, what else Hashem is doing. We know Hashem as the creator of the world, but Hashem is infinitely everything else, right? But out of the center point of godliness, like the Arizal told us, this is his primary concern. That's how the Rochel, if I'm not mistaken, explains in Adina. This is what Hashem has going on, kiviyachol. I mean, this came from the most potent center point of infinity, kiviyachol, right? As the Arizal explains it, as it were. But that HaKadosh Baruch Hu chose to be mishabed himself to 4 letters and not 8, right? Hyper specific, Yud and K and Vav and K, with 5 elements, including the Kutza da Ois Yud, with 5 realms, Adam Kalman, Atzilus, Bria, Yitzira, Asiya, with 10 spheres, and like the Sefer Yitzir says, not 11 and not 9, 10. And this that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created history in such a way where it unfolds over 6 millennia, which is connected to Ois Vav. And on those 6 millennia, it's an aspect of Anagas HaMishpat, where HaKadosh Baruch Hu is interacting with the world through schar and einish, and giving us the reins to be able to live in such a way, personally, communally, nationally, on a human level, to be able to run the world and to be able to, and everything operates midah connected midah, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu binds himself to that, Hashem tzilcha, and he doesn't act beyond that, generally, right? And millions of other ways in which HaKadosh Baruch Hu is mitzamtzim himself to a system of specificity. 22 letters of the Aleph Beis, not 23. Specific, from Aleph to Taf, and that's that. And everything else. Torah, right? Torah Akdasha, with its letters, and its specific mitzvahs, and Taryag, and not Taryad, right? Not 614. Specific. So from this that we're able to say that HaKadosh Baruch Hu's infinity and his infinite freedom is highlighted and most acutely expressed dafka through his freely chosen act to commit himself to a particularized system. Applying that model to me and you, which is kiviyachal nahadal elf avdalas, because we're not ultimately free, but in the context of our freedom, which means my ability as an adult male, an adult female, but I'm not an adult female, but as an adult, to be able to choose whatever I want. I can choose to live however I like. I can wake up in the morning and do what I like, right? Theoretically. I have freedom in that sense. When I choose of my own volition to commit myself to Torah and mitzvahs, which is a system of hyper-specificity, say Chazal, ein ben chayrin elamisha isik b'Torah. The greatest act of my freedom, just like HaKadosh Baruch Hu Kiviyachol, is to say I'm so free that I can even freely choose to commit myself to a particular system and to live within it. And that's Mahu Afata. Just like HaKadosh Baruch Hu is so infinitely free that he could choose to generate a realm of limitation and show up in that specific system. And that's the greatest indicator of his freedom, which is his infinity. So to us in our lives, when we make the volitional choice to live with halacha and to commit myself, this is the greatest expression of our freedom. I am so free that I can freely choose to commit. Just like Hashem is so infinite that he can freely choose to generate a realm of finitude and show up within it. This is the ben chayrin of Misha Isik B'Torah. And I just thought, as I'm learning this is mamish the beginning of Torah and Zayin and Ois Beis, right, which was the model of the neder. The beginning of Torah and Zayin speaks about HaKadosh Baruch Hu's infinite freedom and his choice to manifest a realm of malachim, meta malachim, more specific malachim, Torah shebiksav, as it manifests in Torah shebal peh, and that produces emunas chachamim, meaning that produces a whole system, a framework of specificity. And we said, well, people have a challenging time with that. I don't want to engage in that framework. It's so limiting. It's so constricting. I want to be free. Comes along Ois Beis and says, no, that's the whole nekuda. That's why Torah shebal peh exists. Because HaKadosh Baruch Hu, as an act of volitional freedom, entered into this system of Torah shebiksav, and then from within it came Torah shebal peh, and that is an act of freedom, right? The ultimate act of freedom. So how am I going to have the emunas chachamim to want to experience and to want to involve myself, be oisik in Torah, be oisik in that system? The answer is neder. It's the same consciousness that HaKadosh Baruch Hu had. I'm not mechuyev to act. It's optional. Do you hear this?
Is neder code for optional?
Yeah, in this context, right? The way that we're learning it, that's right. We understood. That's how Rabbi Nachman is representing this approach, right? We have to approach Chazal through the consciousness of neder. Ki'ilu, it's not. I'm not mechuyev. I'm doing it because I want to do it. And that's what we said. I realize now that Chazal only said what they said because they were trying to help me live my best life. Right? And that's a completely different way of approaching it. But over here you see these two things go together. I'm not sure if I'm expressing myself well. Do you hear the connection? That HaKadosh Baruch Hu in Ois Aleph, as an act of his volitional freedom, enters into the system and therefore generates a realm of Torah shebal peh. And then I'm supposed to take a lesson from there to myself in Ois Beis to say, that's how I can be mishabed myself to said system, not as an act of shibud, which is going to be, I'm going to be in contention with Chazal, but rather as an act of ultimate freedom, just like HaKadosh Baruch Hu's act of ultimate freedom. Okay, so that was what we were zeicha to on Friday. I thought that was really, Baruch Hashem, we're zeicha to a lot of chidushim, but that's different.
But maybe you have to also still learn Torah and Vav first to afilu bastar. So that afilu sham, madubash Hashem is that there's almost like the Rachmanis aspect to it first, that you have that even in these random places that are so finite, so what's the word? mundane,
limited.
limited. It's in a way the same, and it's all about malchus.
Yeah, absolutely.
It could also be that Rabbeinu is highlighting that even when we've got a chiyuv, we've got a choice to obligate ourselves to the chiyuv.
That's exactly what you're saying.
Yeah.
There are two ways of engaging with Torah.
Yeah.
You can also engage with Torah, same thing, as an eved. That's not the ideal. There are still chiyuvim in Torah, right? HaKadosh Baruch Hu will have you live your best life whether you like it or not. Meaning, Hashem sees the bigger picture. HaKadosh Baruch Hu knows that in 10, 20 years down, a person will mature, they'll come to appreciate the system. But that's not the ultimate. The ultimate, remember, Matan Torah is characterized as a wedding. It's not an Indian. There's kafalim harkigigas, right? Which the Gemara says, "Maida Rabbi Araisa." That's not how it's supposed to be, right? And our answer is given, right? That was for Torah Shebal Peh, that was for times of Shibud. But the ideal is supposed to be, we enter into it b'chafitza, b'dvekus, b'cheshek. That's the ultimate way that it's supposed to be. Again, Rachmana Libabai, right? The ultimate goal that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants from all of us is engaging in Torah mitzvahs out of a freely chosen act of love. Without a question.
We can just go from that neder into Pele, which comes just after. Is Pele the totza'ah of that neder, of connecting the infinite with the finite, or maybe for the Odom, for us as created, is Pele the encounter, positive or negative, almost?
So I'll tell you two things. I'll tell you, I'm very happy you brought that up, right? We don't usually do this. We're spending so much time just on, but it's really crucial because it's Matanam and Hashemayim. You have to cherish it. But two things on Pele. Number one, Pele is a code word for Keser. Okay, Pele is Keser, right? Pele is the letter Aleph. It alludes to the beginning of the system. So based on what we're saying now, right, we have a much deeper insight into why Pele is related here. What's Keser? Keser is the Ratzon of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's the motivation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, right? It's in Keser that the aspect of koyach hagvul bebilti gvul and the motivation of desiring a dir b'tachtonim, right, is manifest for the purpose of then bringing the entire system into fruition, right? So it absolutely relates to Keser. It goes back to motivation, where, like we're saying now, the person is expected, in an ideal sense, to actually consciously choose, like, what's motivating me to engage in Torah mitzvahs. I'm pressured by my family, by my community, by my system. It's mashu acher, right? So Bali Tshuva do it the right way. The way that, and halavai, we should all be Bali Tshuva. In the beginning, nobody's forcing them, hopefully, or bribing them with too much hummus bar, wink wink, or sushi haven. But nobody's forcing. This is what they want. That's the way that it's supposed to be, right? That's the keser that reflects HaKadosh Baruch Hu's motivation to create the world. It was olam chesed ibani. He didn't have to create the world. He chose to create the world. And that should be our consciousness, right? So again, to be clear, Chazal are binding, right? And HaKadosh Baruch Hu, there's schar and oynish. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is very serious about this. But from my perspective, the consciousness with which I engage in the system could either be one of shibud, or it could be one of neder, right? And that's the way that the Rebbe is learning it. The other aspect was simply, or not simply, also deeply, but basically what we already learned in Ois Beis, was that Keser is a place of rachamim. And so the tikkun is realizing that Chazal did not create, like Rabbi Yosef Karo didn't write Shulchan Aruch as a punishment for me. He wasn't in like an energy of like, I'm going to ruin the lives of millions of people for all time, rubbing his and writing down, like, well, not like that, but writing probably like this, right? Writing Shulchan Aruch. That wasn't what it was. Right? It was come from a place of such love and such rachamim. Keser, that's the place where Amunas Chachamim, that's the place where the eitzas of the Chachamim come from, like the Rebbe said, what the aspect of the Mekar from which they draw their eitzas is a bechina of Pele. Right? Ki al yidei haneder hu oila la shoresh ha-chachamim mushrashim sham. That's where the Chachamim are mushrash, in a place of Keser. In the beginning of this year, the first part, and I will go weiter, we were explaining a much deeper context for what that shirish is. Not just rachamim, which is true, right? But the motivation to create a system of specificity out of a freely chosen act, which mirrors HaKadosh Baruch Hu's creation of the world, which unfolds through Torah Shebiksav and Torah Sheba'al Peh. So Torah Sheba'al Peh is where we meet HaKadosh Baruch Hu's chosen system of limitation. HaKadosh Baruch Hu generates that system, and there it is waiting for me to generate my own engagement with the system from a similarly free place, right? But adjusted to my human freedom, which, like we said in the beginning, is not really all that free, because I'm still human at the end of the day. But at the end of the day, this is a point of meeting. And just to say one more word on this, once I mentioned wedding, once I'm mentioning Har Sinai, isn't that what a marriage is? Right? There's the institution of marriage, which comes with a certain commitment, right, to a shared life that automatically, asalah kula al makakdish, right? That basically says we are both choosing out of a freely chosen act. That's why forced marriage is such a horrific thing. Such a horrific thing because it's a chilul of the institution of marriage. Right? It's not shot. It's just like a bad thing because it's abuse. It's beyond abuse. Because what's a marriage supposed to be? A marriage means two people out of a freely chosen act, because they can marry anybody they like in the world and they're free to do what they like. They are choosing a system of very, 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 very constricted and specified limitation out of a desire to respect that institution. Not because they were forced, but out of a freely chosen act of love. That's what a marriage is. Matan Torah is a marriage. HaKadosh Baruch Hu freely chooses to show up in this system. He's infinite. He can do whatever he likes. He chooses to meet us here, and then we then have an opportunity to approach that same point.
Nothing.
Right? So, just 1 second. Either it's going to be like a forced relationship, chas v'shalom, right? Which is not what Hashem intended. Never what Hashem intended. Rachmana lipa. Or it's going to be an aspect of a Yiddishkeit of Shir HaShirim, which is a bona fide, loving choice that either of the two parties make, each one free in their own way, but kiviyachol, right? Our freedom, klapi Hashem's freedom. But this is where we meet, and if this is where we meet, then Ein Ben Chayr, that's the freest act in the world, right? It's a symbol of freedom when a person is able to choose what to be mishabed himself to. And then to be mishabed out of a freely chosen act, not because they're mukhrach liot.
I think broad parameters of marriage are like Torah Shebechsav, and then beyond that, that's the Torah Sheba'al Peh,
beautiful
marriage where one's self-limiting.
Even beyond, right? And then there's Hasidus, right? Going beyond the letter of the law. Absolutely. A relationship. Okay? Gevaldik. Amazing. Good. Let's continue now from here. We're up to Zayin. Okay, we went back a little bit, and now let's continue with Zayin b'siyata d'shmaya. Says the Elisheva, V'da, a person needs to understand and should know that in order to be mevatel and in order to be machnia the oivim, if I could just ask to turn the air on. Possible shkoyach, right? To be mevatel machnia the oivim, dai hatsoyim oyachila Shabbos levad. You can do one of two things. Either the fast is going to be enough, like we said, that's what a fast is able to accomplish, or a person could experience the dignity of Einik Shabbos, and that would also cause the downfall of the enemies, like we've learned. Roiv hashalim, but for an aspect of Roiv hashalim, for a more magnified and intensive experience of peace, it's not enough just to fast or Achila Shabbos. Both need to be accompanied by the giving of tzedakah. K'mayim chachamenu is kind of the Rochel, like the Gemara says, mar b'tzedakah, like the Mishnah says, mar b'tzedakah, mar b'shalom. When a person gives more tzedakah, so then mar b'shalom. Then there's more shalom in the world. Able to make peace between people, and people are caring for each other. We create a society where people are looking after one another, people care for one another. The Gemara in Brachas Tavavam Beis says, Agra de Tanisa Tzidkasa. The Gemara is going through a number of different experiences there and telling us what the true benefit of those experiences are, which are not like you might think. But what is the Agra de Tanisa? Why does a person get reward for fasting? And the answer is Tzidkasa. As Machlokes Rashi and the Marsha there as to the understanding of this. Rashi learns simply that at the end of the Tainis there used to be a minute to give tzedakah. So as people were going out after the taanis, people would give much more than usual, probably because, in a consciousness of fasting, your heart is more rach, right? And that's why people got schar for their taanis, was for the tzedakah that they gave at the end. The Maharsha has a very interesting take. He says something else. He says that the people, Yidden back in the day, used to be so scrupulous with regard to their fasting that they didn't want the money that they saved from that day of not eating to be used for their own benefit. So they would take that day's worth of whatever they would have spent on breakfast, lunch, and dinner, right? And they would give that all to tzedakah. That's what the Maharsha says. That's the hashlama of the fast, right? Not only don't I want to eat, even the money that I saved, I don't want to touch, right? So that's what the Maharsha says. Agrid the tanisa tzidkasa. Okay, but we find that taanis needs to be accompanied by tzedakah. Va'amru, and it says shemesh b'shabes tzedakah la'aniyim. So we find tzidkasa, tzedakah by taanis, and we find tzedakah by Shabbos, shemesh b'Shabbos, tzedakah la'aniyim. When it's sunny day on Shabbos, then it's tzedakah la'aniyim. Then the poor people are able to walk around and they're able to just soak in the sun, and it's Einik Shabbos for them, that it doesn't have to be raining or snowing or something like that, right? That's tzedakah la'aniyim. That is considered to be a tzedakah. So we see again tzedakah by taanis and tzedakah by Shabbos, and shebesh is a b'china shalom, and the sun is an aspect of peace. Like the Gemara says, "V'zarcha alav hashemesh," that the sun will shine down upon him. This is an aspect of abava machteres, right? A person who is tunneling under a home, where if it is determined that the person was trying to kill the person in the home, then the homeowner goes and kills him first, then he's pater, right? Because he was chayach hakaydin, he's protecting himself. But if the sun shines, right, and it becomes clear that this person, like the sunny day, right, right, it's peace for everybody. Everybody on a sunny day is just nicer to each other and smiling in the park and everything, right? So it emerges that this person was emerging, right, from the tunnel. And he didn't have any ill intent, right? Whatever his intention was, but he wasn't coming to harm the homeowner. Then the person who killed him is chayiv, right? But the Gemara learns that that's the symbol of shemesh, right? Is shalom. He was coming b'shalom, because just like shemesh brings peace to l'chal b'yolam, so to this person was coming peacefully. So you see that shemesh is an aspect of shalom. Eina ela al yedei tzedakah la'aniyim. True shalom comes through tzedakah, and that's the aspect of tzedakah that needs to accompany our Einik Shabbos, and that shemesh b'Shabbos tzedakah la'aniyim. When you have tzedakah connected to Shabbos, so in addition to Einik Shabbos, we're having guests, right? And that's the tzedakah. You're hosting people for Shabbos. That's the aspect of shemesh, which is, like we're learning, shalom. That's the ultimate kind of peace. What's the chilik? What's the chilik between the shalom that's a result of taanis in the weekday, which comes along with tzedakah, and Einik Shabbos? I cannot speak this morning. Shabbos, it's like tongue twisters. Einik Shabbos that comes along with tzedakah. What's the chilik? Says the Gereba Noisches V'da. Person should know sheyesh chilik bein hashalom shel hataanis shel chol or bein hashalom shel Einik Shabbos. There's a distinction between the peace that is brought about by fasting during the weekday along with tzedakah, like we learned, agrid the tanisa tzidkasa, and the peace that's brought about through Einik Shabbos in the right way together with tzedakah. What's the chilik? So here again, very cryptic. Okay, this is very, very cryptic. Let's see if we could try a little bit to find a mahalach with it. Very, very cryptic. Says the Rebbe, Hainu. Hashalom shel hataanis ein leb'chinas dibur. The peace that is resultant of fasting during the 6 days of the week and giving tzedakah lacks an aspect of dibur. V'chinas v'lo yachlu daber l'shalom. They were not able to speak to him with peace, right? This is a reference to Yosef Atzadik and his brothers, that as a result of him going ahead and slandering them, right, and tattletaling, they weren't able to speak with him peacefully. And now that I mentioned Yosef, I must thank Reb Jeremy very, very greatly. I made a big mistake on the previous page when I quoted the pasuk of Lama charalach v'lama naflu panecha. And I erroneously attributed that to Yosef Atzadik speaking to the people in the pit. And there's a very similar pasuk. He says, "Madua naflu panecha mayayim." Right. So I'm not that off. Right. But the pasuk there does refer to the face having a falling. But of course, like Jeremy corrected me, this is Hashem speaking to Cain right after the murder of Hevel. I literally can't talk. Before the murder. Before the murder.
Yeah.
Oh, you're saying right before because he sees that he's sad, right? And then they carry on and have the conversation about the murder, and that also makes more sense in the context because as a result of him losing his Selam Alekim, so then Hashem needs to put a mark in order to protect him, right? Because, like we learned, a person only has the fear of people if they have the Selam Alekim on their face. Just to make a yichud of all these things over here, because I did mention Yosef Atzadik, that Mefarshim tell us, I believe the Torah Tamima brings us down, that this is the same aspect of why Yaakov Avinu was so upset when he heard that Taraf Taraf Yosef, right? And he couldn't mourn. He was so upset when he heard that Yosef Atzadik had been torn apart by beasts, right? What was really troubling him, right, beyond the loss of his son, obviously, is that, it says the Torah Tamima, because he knew that if Yosef Atzadik would have maintained his Selam Alekim, he would have been safe, right? But from this that he hears that an animal attacked Yosef Atzadik, it means somehow that he had lost his Selam Alekim, and that, says the Torah Tamima, was what Yaakov Avinu was mourning so deeply. Be that as it may, I'm very grateful for the correction. Okay, so we come back here to where we are up to, and this is speaking about Yosef Atzadik. V'lo yachlu dabrei l'shalom. There's an aspect of shalom that lacks dibur. Lo yachlu dabrei l'shalom. It could be shalom, but lo yachlu dabrei. It can lack the aspect of dibur. Aval yidu oineg achila Shabbos. But through the oineg of achila Shabbos, which is accompanied by the tzedakah, like Reb Nassan writes in Likutei Quran, which is a reference to hosting aniyim, right, at our home for Shabbos. That's the aspect of tzedakah that you do on Shabbos, right, is having people at your home. That's tzedakah. So then nishlam hadibur l'shalom. This is a different kind of shalom. There's a passive shalom, like a cold shalom of just giving someone tzedakah and then carrying out, which is beautiful in and of itself. But then there's a shalom that's panim b'panim. There's a shalom that's relational. There's a shalom that's the result of a relationship, of an exchange of dialogue. B'chinas lamana chai v're'ai adabrana shalom. Right? That's a shalom that comes with dibur. So he juxtaposes these two psukim. By Yosef Atzadik it says lo yachle dabrei l'shalom. Right? Again, he's using it as a remez. Over there wasn't peace either. But the Rebbe is using it as a remez. There could be an aspect of shalom where there's no dibur with that shalom. But then we're learning over here, adabra no shalom. Yeah, you can have shalom that has dibur bechinas v'daber davar hanemar b'Shabbos. This is the aspect of daber davar, right? Hiluchecha v'daber davar, all the different shvusim, all the different aspects of kavod Shabbos, right? Daber davar. There's a very specific way that a person ought to speak on Shabbos. We don't speak on Shabbos like we do during the 6 days of the week. So you see that there's something related to Shabbos that's related to dibur, and we know that Shabbos has, of course, Shalom, right? Shabbos Shalom, Shabbat Shalom. That's the aspect of what we learned in Torah of Zayin, right? Shabbos is connected to the aspect of peace, of Shalom. And that's the dibur of Shabbos that's related to the tzedakah of being able to host people in our home. Because, says the Rebbe, the mouth is illuminated with tremendous art at the time of Achila Shabbos, our conversations that you can have at a Shabbos Suda in ways of love and peace and friendship that you can't necessarily have elsewhere. There's a certain energy, a certain environment that's dafka created through the holiness of the setting, and the Achila b'kedusha, and the Amunah that relates to the shlemus of the peh. Why the shlemus of the peh dafka? So this goes back to what we were saying in the previous page in Ois Daled, that what is peh? Malchus is peh. Shabbos is Malchus. This is David HaMelech. This is the aspect of the Malchus, the Kedusha, the peh, that's illuminated in the appropriate way. Going back to Torah Aleph, the Levana, right, the moon that's illuminated by the light of the sun, by all the spheres that come from above and shine their light upon her. So on Shabbos, there's shlemus for the whole inyan of the peh. the achila of the peh, the shasiya of the peh, and the dibur of the peh. That's the bechina of Torah shebal peh, where there can be dialogue now, like we were learning in the beginning of this year. That is where we encounter HaKadosh Baruch Hu dialogically, right? We have a conversation with Hashem. Hashem speaks to us through Torah shebiksav, even more specifically through Torah shebal peh, and then we communicate with HaKadosh Baruch Hu through tefillah, and specifically davening to be able to be mekayim the Torah, right? And that's the dialogue that we have with Hashem. That's the framework. Those are the conditions necessary for the marital relationship of commitment to work, like we learned. So on Shabbos, Malchus has a tikkun. This is the aspect of Adni Sefasai Tiftach. The Bechina of Shabbos, Malchusa, feminine, right? Which is Rosh Hashanah, like we learned in Torah Yod, Eishes. What we say in Friday night by Shal Shudas, by Lichadaidi, right? Uri, Uri, Shir Daberi, Kvaid, Hashem Alayach Nikla, right? Kavaid is Malchus, right? Baruch Shem Kavaid, Malchuscha. All these things are connected. Shem Adni, Adni Yitain Omer, Kavod V'lo Yidaim, right? Kavod that leads to a lack of silence, that leads to dibur, etc., etc., etc. So it is specifically on Shabbos that the peh is nishlam, but the Rebbe says an amazing thing. It isn't for naught that the mouth is what we use to speak, and the mouth is also what we use to eat. Says the Rebbe, these two things are linked. When the eating is in an appropriate way, what comes in is going to reflect in what comes out. Person's in a state of emunah. Person's every bite that they take of the physical world is a dialogical bite, so to speak, right? Is taking place in the context of a relationship with Hashem. Every morsel of food we put into our mouths is saturated with the emunah of the relationship. Beini uvei b'nei Yisrael, ois hila olam. Memela, that's going to cause the setting at the Shabbos table to be one of connection and one of relationship and one of dibur, right? So it's like, because the achila represents the ultimate limitation, so to speak, of myself, given all the things I could eat or all the ways in which I could eat those things, to a specific way of eating on Shabbos Kodesh, and that puts me in direct relationship with Hashem, that memela is going to translate into the relationship that I'm able to have with the people, right, who are around me, right, at least in an ideal state, right, alabai, right. This is the way that it could or should be.
Which is Malchus, almost subsumes or sits on top of the food, meaning it's kasa to the sort of the food that we ingest.
How so? Say just because it encloses?
In a way, yes. Saying what one can see there, Malchus, the pair as in Malchus, but also because the way it's like just the way we're elevating sort of semi-inanimate or now inanimate. Beautiful. Right. I mean, once you brought that up, I just double click on a particular aspect of what you're saying, is that Rav Nosson goes to great lengths to teach that the process of eating is exactly undoing the process by which the food was made. Right? Because what happens with the food is that we take it from a very general state, right? It's just a grain of wheat, right? And then there's all process, the malachas hapas, of how to take that thing and specify it, right? Getting rid of all the chaff, right? And the things that you don't need through winnowing, and then going ahead and grinding, and then taking that and the flour, mixing it with water, until you get to a finished product, right? Specifies. And eating does the exact opposite, right? And goes through all the processes, right? We first grinding it up, and then we swallow it, and that separates all the different nutrients, and then eventually it goes back. So it's very deep. It's almost as if eating is an experience of taking us from the specific and giving us access, right, to the higher realms, right? From Torah Sheba'al Peh, moving higher, right, and more unfettered and unspecified up into the hierarchical system of a lack of specificity. That's the Peh. But the Peh relates, be that as it may, to this experience of
the dialogue, right, where we're able to encounter our Kadosh Baruch Hu and move through to the other side, that is going to impact the shalom, right, around the table. Okay, we'll go a little bit. The only difference between chametz and matzah is mashahu, right? What's a mashahu? A mashahu is like, right, even a tiny bit of chametz on Pesach is not batal be'ela. It's not batal at all, right? It is chametz is just aser b'mashahu. But the difference between chametz and matzah is also that mashahu. Why? Because, like we know, 2/3 of the word matzah is the same as chametz, right? The mem and the tzadi. What's different? The ches and the hey. But even the ches and the hey are not different, right? They're just lacking one tiny little drop. Chametz is the aspect of tikkun hakas, of rectifying kas through tainus, as we said earlier. Bechinas mizeh ba me'edem chamutz begadim. Right? We say this on Shabbos, also one of the piyutim, right? HaKadosh Baruch Hu comes from Edom, chametz begadim, with stained clothing. And that's Edom. That's an aspect of the downfall of our enemies. Edom is a bechinas kaved, right? And that's the aspect of the kaved, which is the bechina of red. The chametz, a bechinas hachnaas, a bechinas tainus, right? And chametz begadim, shows the downfall of our enemies. Bechinas tainus, bechinas heder achila, which is the aspect of a lack of eating. Bechinas kol machmetzes, right? Chametz is related to not eating, right? You shall not eat chametz. That's the aspect of tainus, right? So chametz is connected with tainus because kol machmetzes lo yisechelu, and chametz is the aspect of chametz begadim, which relates to the downfall of our enemies. Lo yisechelu is a bechinas tainus hanal. But matzah is something else. Matzah is a bechinas achilas einik Shabbos. Matzah is the aspect of achilas Shabbos with tzedakah, right? Chametz is the aspect of tainus with tzedakah. All right, and that's one level. Matzah is something else. Bechinas laman tamoitzu v'hisanagtem. The aspect of tamoitzu, you shall just draw on all of the energies that you're privileged with. In the pasuk Yeshayahu speaking about the redemption of Yerushalayim, v'hisanagtem, and then you shall just experience the joy of Einik Shabbos, and that's the aspect of matzah. V'zeu ein bein chametz lematzah. What is the difference between the result of a tainus with tzedakah on the one hand and Einik Shabbos with tzedakah on the other hand? The difference is mashu. What's mashu? Is Rosh Tevis Neitrikun Vahaya Maise Hatstaka Shalom. The difference is Shalom. The difference will be in the aspect of Shalom. This shalom, that's a result of the tainus with tzedakah, the 6 days of the week, which is the bechina of chametz, ein loipeh, because the letter ches is closed up all around, so there's no dibor. But matzah, which is the shalom of Einik Shabbos together with tzedakah, that's the aspect of yesh loipeh, that's the aspect of the letter hey, that has an open mouth, and that leads to dialogue. But Ezra Hashem will continue with this tomorrow morning. What a privilege to continue the journey, start a new week the right way. And we're looking forward to continuing the Ezra Hashem tomorrow morning. Yashikach, thank you so much for joining us. Ani haben v'ata ha'av shali shekol kach ohev oti ha'av shali melech chai v'kayah על כל נשימה שאני